Clara Whitmore pressed both hands flat against the kitchen table to stop them from shaking, because if her hands shook, the men standing in the doorway would know she recognized them. She kept her eyes on the dough. She kept breathing. She counted the seconds between one heartbeat and the next, and told herself it was not them. It could not be them. She had been so careful, she had given a false name at every stop between St. Louis and Montana, and nobody was supposed to know she was here. If this story moves something in you, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me. This is where it truly begins. The stagecoach rolled into Willow Creek, Montana on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1887, and the town paid it no particular attention. Dust came in with every coach. Strangers came in with every coach. The general store kept its door open. The blacksmith kept his hammer swinging, and the women gathered along the boardwalk, watched the coach door swing wide with the mild, calculating interest of people who had very little else to occupy their afternoons. What stepped down from that coach, however, made three of them go quiet mid-sentence. She was young, not much past 25, and she was alone, which was already enough to start the whispers. She carried a single suitcase, old wood with brass clasps, that had been repaired so many times the original hardware was barely visible beneath the replacements. Her dress was clean, but thin at the elbows. Her hair had been pinned carefully, but hours of road had loosened it, and she did not reach up to fix it. She simply stood on the street, adjusted the grip on her suitcase with both hands, and looked at the town with the careful, assessing eyes of someone who had arrived in enough new places to know immediately which ones meant trouble. Willow Creek, Montana meant trouble. She could feel it in the way the women stopped talking. "Traveling alone," said a voice from the boardwalk. Clara turned. A heavy-set woman in a dark dress stood with her arms folded and her chin lifted, wearing the expression of someone exercising a civic duty. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "Where from?" "East," Clara said. She kept her voice flat and pleasant, and she did not elaborate because elaboration was an invitation, and she was not issuing invitations. The woman's eyes moved to the suitcase, then back to Clara's face. "Family here?" "No, ma'am. Work. Looking for it." A pause settled between them that was not entirely comfortable. The woman said nothing, but she did not move either, and Clara understood that this was a town that considered itself entitled to know its newcomers thoroughly and without delay. "I heard the Raven Ridge Ranch is taking on kitchen help," said a younger woman standing slightly behind the first. She had kind eyes and said it quickly, like she was slipping something under a door before someone could close it. "Mr. Cole posted a notice at the feed store 3 weeks back. Might still be open." "Ruth," said the heavy-set woman sharply. "She's looking for work, Harriet," Ruth said without apology. She looked at Clara. "It's 3 miles north of town. Big property. You'd have to ask at the gate." "Thank you," Clara said. She picked up her suitcase and walked. She did not look back at Harriet. She did not look at the other women watching from the shade of the milliner's awning. She kept her eyes on the road north, and she walked with her spine straight and her chin level, because that was the only way she knew how to arrive anywhere anymore, as though she had chosen to be there, as though she was expected, as though she belonged. It was a posture she had perfected across 2 states and 4 years of running, and she wore it now the same way she wore her thin dress because it was all she had. The road to Raven Ridge Ranch was indeed 3 miles, and she walked every one of them. The sun was well past its peak when she reached the gate, and her feet ached in a way she had learned not to think about directly. The gate itself was iron tall and built to communicate something specific about the man who owned what lay beyond it. It said, "This is serious land, seriously held." It said, "You are not arriving casually." 2 ranch hands were visible in the near distance working fence line, and a third stood closer near a water trough, watching her approach with his thumbs hooked in his belt, and no particular warmth in his expression. "Help you," he said. "I'm here about the cook position," Clara said. "I was told there was a notice posted." The ranch hand looked her over the way the women in town had, but with less social pretense. He was simply assessing whether she was worth the walk to the main house, and it took him a few seconds. "That notice is 3 weeks old," he said. "Is the position filled?" "Not yet." "Then I'd like to speak to Mr. Cole." Another beat of silence. He pulled a slow breath and looked at her suitcase, and then at her face again, and something shifted. Not warmth exactly, but a decision. "Wait here," he said. She waited. The main house was not visible from the gate, but she could hear the ranch, the distant movement of horses, the sound of men calling to each other across a wide space. The particular quality of noise that comes from a property that is large and working and constantly in motion. It was a sound she found steadying. She had worked on enough properties to know what a functioning ranch felt like, and this one felt serious and real, which was more than she could say for some of the places she had been offered shelter over the past 4 years. The ranch hand came back. "Mr. Cole will see you." He led her up the drive and around the side of the main house, which was large and well-built, and had clearly been expanded in stages as the ranch grew. The original structure was visible in the bones of it, a modest, solid house, and the additions were good work, but they had the slight mismatch of things added by a man focused on function rather than aesthetics. She noticed the kitchen garden as they passed. It was overgrown, but not dead, which told her something. Neglected, not abandoned. There was a difference. Nathan Cole was standing on the back porch. She had expected someone older. The notices she had seen for large ranch operations were almost always posted by men in their 50s who had spent decades building their properties and now needed help maintaining them. Nathan Cole was 38, and he had the look of a man who had spent those 38 years entirely outdoors and entirely in motion. He was not unkind looking. He was simply closed in the way that certain doors are closed, not locked, but not particularly interested in being opened either. He had dark hair with early gray at the temples and eyes the color of winter water, and he looked at her with the specific attention of a man who had learned to read people quickly because his time was too valuable to waste on those who would not serve his purposes. "You're looking for the cook position," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "Where have you cooked before?" "Private households primarily. I spent 2 years cooking for the Harlan family in Kansas City, before that 18 months at the Caldwell boarding house in Abilene. I also have experience with large group meals ranch hands harvest crews." I was watching her. Not just listening, watching the way a careful man watches when the information being offered seems credible but incomplete. "Why'd you leave Abilene?" he said. "The boarding house closed," Clara said. It was true. It was not the complete truth, but it was true. "And before that, Kansas City. The Harlan family relocated east. I didn't have cause to follow them." Nathan Cole was quiet for a moment. He leaned one shoulder against the porch post and looked at her suitcase, really looked at it the way he had been looking at her reading it. "You're traveling light," he said. "I travel what I need." "A woman traveling alone to a ranch in Montana," he said, "with one suitcase and references she's carrying in her head because she doesn't have them on paper. That's either a woman who doesn't have much to hide or a woman who's very good at hiding things." Clara held his gaze. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I am an honest worker. I don't steal, I don't gossip, and I don't make trouble. I can cook for 50 men or for 5, and the quality won't change. I'm asking for honest work, and I'm offering honest labor in return, and that is the entirety of what's between me and you at this moment." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, not yet, not close, but the slight recalibration of a man who has been given an answer he didn't expect and is deciding what to do with it. He was quiet long enough that she thought the answer was going to be no. "Trial period," he said finally. 2 weeks. If the men are satisfied with the cooking and you satisfy my requirements for how this household is run, we discuss terms. If not, I'll give you $2 for your time and you're back on the road." "That's fair," she said. "The kitchen's in poor condition," he said. "The last cook left it a mess, and I haven't had it properly sorted. You'll have supply access, but you'll need to organize what's there first before you can do anything useful." "I'll start this afternoon," she said. He looked at her once more, that steady reading look, and then he straightened from the post. "Holt will show you the kitchen and your room," he said, nodding toward the ranch hand who had brought her up. "Supper is expected at 6:30. Ranch hands eat first, the house eats at 7. I expect punctuality." "Yes, sir." He went inside. The door did not close hard behind him. It closed quietly, the way a man closes a door when he has made a decision and moved on to the next thing. Clara stood on the porch for exactly 2 seconds, then picked up her suitcase and turned to follow Holt. The kitchen was worse than poor condition. It was not a mess in the way of filth. Someone had been maintaining basic hygiene. The surfaces were not grimy, but it was a kitchen that had been running on minimum function for too long, the kind of neglect that comes not from laziness, but from absence of care. The pantry organization made no sense. Staples were mixed with specialty items in a way that suggested the previous cook had simply put things where they fit, rather than where they belonged. The stove needed work on one of the dampers. The prep table was solid, but had warped slightly on one end, which would matter for pastry work and needed to be compensated for. The knife set was adequate, but improperly stored. The seasoning collection was extensive and almost entirely unlabeled, which meant someone with knowledge had built it, but left before passing that knowledge on. Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen and turned a slow circle, and felt for the first time since she had stepped off the stagecoach something close to calm. She understood kitchens. She understood them the way some people understood horses or land or law. Not as a skill exactly, but as a language. She was fluent in, had always been fluent in, could read in a glance, and speak without thinking. Whatever else was uncertain, whatever else was frightening. Whatever she had carried in that suitcase for 4 years and prayed no one would ever discover she understood this kitchen. She set her suitcase in her room, a small room off the back passage, adequate private with a door that locked, which mattered more to her than its size, and she came back to the kitchen and she began. By 6:15, she had reorganized the pantry, identified the 17 unlabeled spice jars by smell, adjusted her approach to the stove damper, and produced a beef stew that smelled, as Holt later described it to the other hands, like something his grandmother had made before she died. And he did not say it as flattery, he said it as fact, with the bewildered sincerity of a man who did not entirely understand how it had happened. The ranch hands ate at the long table in the cook's dining room, and she listened to them from the kitchen. Not to their words exactly, they were men, and they talk the way men talk when they are tired and hungry, and the food in front of them is good, but to the texture of it, the sound of a room becoming less tense. There was a quality to a room where people were eating well that she had learned to identify years ago. It was the particular hush that falls between one conversation and the next, when everyone is briefly, wordlessly content. She heard it at 6:42. She carried the remaining dishes through to the main house dining room at exactly 7, and she did not rush them, and she did not fumble them, and she had added fresh bread because she had found a good flour in the back of the pantry that had not been used and should have been, and she had also found a small quantity of dried apple that she had put to better use than sitting in a jar. Nathan Cole was already seated when she brought the food in. Across from him was a boy 11 years old, she estimated, with dark eyes and his uncle's bone structure and the specific careful stillness of a child who has learned to be quiet in rooms with adults. He looked at the food when she set it down, then at her, and then back at the food. "That smells different," the boy said. "Elliot," Nathan said. "I didn't say it was bad," Elliot said with the precision of someone who had been corrected on this distinction before. He looked at Clara again. "Are you the new cook?" "For the next 2 weeks at least," she said. "What happens after 2 weeks?" "That depends on how the cooking goes." Elliot considered this. "It smells good," he said. "Thank you," she said. She went back to the kitchen. She cleaned. She made a list of what was needed from the supply store. She made a second list of what she would need to do to the damper before breakfast, or the morning cooking would be compromised. She did these things with the part of her mind that was always practical, always forward-moving, always focused on the next necessary thing. The other part of her mind was doing what it had done every night for 4 years. She was calculating risk. She was thinking about the false name she had given the stagecoach company in Billings. Not her real name, a name close enough that she would answer to it. Naturally. Different enough that it would not appear in any connection to the records she was afraid of. She was thinking about the suitcase locked in her room and the journal inside it, and the 3 names written in the front of that journal in careful ink. Names that belonged to men who had destroyed 14 ranch families across 3 territories, and who would very much prefer that journal did not reach a federal investigator. She had been running for 4 years. She had taken the journal because she had not known what else to do. She had been 22 years old and working as a cook in the household of a man named Warren Greer in Denver, Colorado. And she had found the journal in the study while she was cleaning, had not been snooping, had genuinely not been snooping, had picked it up because it had fallen behind the desk and she was replacing it. And the page it had fallen open to had the kind of information on it that made your hands go cold. Greer had seen her replace it. He had not said a word. He had simply looked at her across the study with the flat, assessing gaze of a man making a calculation. And she had understood in that moment, with the certainty that sometimes arrives without explanation, that she needed to leave. That night. With whatever she could carry. She had taken the journal because it was evidence. Because she had read enough of it in those few seconds of cold-handed horror to know what it documented. Because some part of her, the stubborn, unreasonable part, that had been told too many times that she was nothing and no one, and that her word meant nothing against the word of powerful men, had refused to simply run and leave those 14 families unrevenged. She had meant to go directly to a federal investigator. She had tried. The first investigator she had approached in Denver had listened to her for 45 seconds and then told her she was mistaken, that Warren Greer was a respectable businessman, that a cook's word against a man of that standing was not evidence. He had said it with the kind of tired bureaucratic certainty that made her understand before she left the building that Greer's reach was longer than she had estimated. She had run. She had been running since. She changed her name slightly at each new town. She never stayed longer than 6 months in any one place. She worked hard and kept to herself, and she was careful, so careful, and for 4 years it had been almost enough. Almost. She knew they were still looking. She knew it the way you know certain things in your body before your mind has articulated them, in the particular awareness that came over her in public places, in the way she always sat with her back to the wall, in the slight tremor in her hands, when she heard a man's voice raised outside a window at night. They had not found her yet, she told herself, washing the last of the supper dishes in the dark kitchen of Raven Ridge Ranch, 3 miles north of Willow Creek, Montana, that they would not find her here. She had been so careful. She had given so few details at every stop. She had not written to anyone. She had not trusted anyone. She dried her hands, and she went to her room, and she locked the door, and she sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her suitcase on her lap, and she pressed her palm flat against the wood of it, the way she sometimes did not. Opening it, just feeling it, and she breathed. The ranch was quiet around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear distantly the sounds of the property settling into night. Horses, wind, the far creak of the bunkhouse door. She put the suitcase under the bed and lay down with her boots still on. She was asleep in 4 minutes, which was faster than she had managed in weeks. She was still afraid. But she was here, and she was fed, and the door was locked, and for tonight, that was enough. The next morning she was in the kitchen before 5. The damper problem was worse than she had assessed the night before. She would need to improvise until she could get the part replaced, which meant adjusting her timing on everything that required sustained heat. But she had cooked on worse stoves in worse circumstances, and she did not let it slow her. She had biscuits in the oven and a pot of oatmeal going and bacon laid in 3 cast-iron pans. By the time the first ranch hand appeared in the doorway at 5:45, looking the way men who work hard look at dawn, present in body, absent everywhere else, he stopped when he smelled the biscuits. He looked at her. He looked at the stove. He looked at her again. Holt wasn't lying, he said apparently to himself, and went to take his seat. By 6, there were 11 men at the long table, and the room had the particular noise of people who were eating well and did not want to use their mouths for talking. Clara moved between the kitchen and the dining room, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, refilling, replacing, quietly noting what they ate most of, so she could adjust tomorrow's quantities. She was carrying the second round of biscuits through when she heard Nathan Cole's voice from the other side of the kitchen door. She stopped. Not because his voice startled her, because of what he was saying. "Doesn't matter what she told you, Holt. I want to know who she actually is." She stood very still with the pan of biscuits in her hands, and the door between her and the hallway, and her heart making itself known behind her sternum in a way it had not in several weeks. She gave good references, Holt said. Kansas City, Abilene. I can write ahead if you want verification. Do that, Nathan said. A pause. Something concerning you, Mr. Cole, Holt asked. Another pause, longer. No, Nathan said, and the single word had the quality of a man who has answered correctly rather than honestly. His footsteps moved away down the hall. Clara stood for 3 more seconds. Then she straightened her spine, and she walked through the door, and she put the biscuits on the table, and she smiled at the ranch hand nearest her when he thanked her, and none of it showed on her face. None of it showed. But she was calculating again. Abilene would check out. She had genuinely worked at the Caldwell boarding house, and she had genuinely left when it closed, and anyone who had been there would remember her would say she was a good worker, reliable, no trouble. Kansas City was more complicated. She had genuinely worked for the Harlan family, but the Harlan family had connections in Denver, and Denver was where she had run from, and she did not know how carefully those connections had been traced in 4 years. She did not know. That was the thing she had learned to live inside of, like a room with no windows. She did not know how much they knew. She did not know where the reach of Warren Greer's influence ended. She did not know if the letter she had sent 3 years ago to a federal marshal in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the letter she had not signed with her real name, that had contained only 3 of the 14 names from the journal, and had directed the marshal to a specific county courthouse record that corroborated the scheme. She did not know if that letter had gone anywhere, had done anything, had been believed or dismissed or lost. She did not know. She knew only that she was here, and the cooking was good, and the boy had said it smelled good, and for the moment she had a locked room and a locked suitcase, and a job that might last 2 weeks or might last longer, and that was what she had. She carried the empty biscuit pan back to the kitchen. She began making the list for the supply store. Elliot appeared in this kitchen doorway at 7:30 after Nathan had gone out to the ranch. He stood there with his hands in his pockets in the way boys stand when they want something but are deciding whether to ask for it. You can come in, Clara said without looking up from her list. He came in. He sat on the stool near the work table and watched her. Uncle Nathan doesn't usually let people in the kitchen, he said. I work in here, she said. That's different. The last cook didn't like people in the kitchen. I don't mind company. He was quiet a moment. Are you going to stay? He said. I'm going to try, she said. He seemed to accept this as a more honest answer than yes would have been. He watched her write her supply list in silence for a while, and then he said, My parents died 2 years ago. She stopped writing. She looked at him. He was not looking for sympathy. His face had the particular flatness of someone who has said a thing many times and learned to say it without needing a particular response. He was simply telling her the way you tell someone a fact, because they are a person in your house now, and facts matter. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it simply without ornamentation. Uncle Nathan took me in, he said. He didn't have to. No, she said. He didn't. Elliot looked at the work table. He's different than he used to be, he said. My father said Uncle Nathan used to laugh a lot. I don't really remember that. Clara looked at the boy and did not say anything for a moment, because there was nothing to say that would not ring false. She had been in enough houses to know the particular shape of grief that Elliot was describing. Not a wound exactly. Not something that was still bleeding, but something that had hardened, where it healed the way a bone heals wrong when there is no one to set it. People change back sometimes, she said finally. When the right things happen. He considered this. Do you think they will? For Uncle Nathan? I don't know your uncle well enough to say, she said. But I know that things sometimes happen that you don't expect. He seemed to find this satisfactory in some way she couldn't entirely explain, because he slid off the stool and said, I'm going to help with the horses, and left. She stood in the kitchen alone and looked at her supply list, and then she picked up her pencil and kept writing. It was on the 4th day that she saw the rider. She was bringing kitchen scraps to the compost bin on the far side of the kitchen garden in the early evening, the light going gold and long across the property, and she happened to look up at the tree line to the east. There was a rider there at the edge of the trees, sitting very still. He was too far to identify. He was simply a shape man on horseback, unmoving, watching the property. Ranch hands did not sit that still. Ranch hands moved. They had purpose and direction, they rode with intent. They were not shapes on a ridgeline going quiet while the light changed. She stood with the kitchen scrap bucket and looked at the shape on the ridgeline and felt the cold arrive in her hands before her mind had finished processing why. Then the rider turned his horse and moved back into the trees and was gone. She went back inside. She finished the evening meal. She served it with the same efficiency she had brought to every meal in 4 days. She smiled at the ranch hands who thanked her. She delivered the main house dinner at 7 and did not flinch when Nathan Cole looked at her with those careful reading eyes, because she had spent 4 years keeping her face honest in the presence of people she could not trust with the truth. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed with her hand on the suitcase, and she did not sleep for a long time. She was not certain the rider was connected to her. She was not. She was also not willing to be wrong about it. She thought about leaving. She had left before quickly in the night with her suitcase and nothing else, and it had always been the right decision. It had kept her safe. It had kept the journal safe, which was what mattered. The journal was what mattered. Those 14 names and the 20 pages of documented theft and bribery and corruption were what mattered, not her. She thought about leaving. She thought about Elliot sitting on the stool, telling her his parents had died in the flat, factual voice of a child who had learned that grief did not always get a response. She thought about the kitchen garden, overgrown but not dead. She thought about Nathan Cole's voice through the kitchen door asking Holt to verify her references, not with cruelty, not with suspicion exactly, but with the careful vigilance of a man protecting something he valued. She thought about what it would mean to have, for the first time in 4 years, a locked door and a bed that was hers, at least for now, at least for 2 weeks. She pressed her palm flat against the suitcase lid, and she breathed. She did not leave. In the morning, she was in the kitchen before 5, and the biscuits were in the oven before the first ranch hand appeared, and the day moved forward, the way days do when you decide to stay inside them rather than run. But she did not stop watching the tree line. And on the 7th day, Nathan Cole knocked on the kitchen door at 8:30 in the evening after the hands had eaten and the main house dishes had been cleared, and said through the door, "Miss Whitmore, when you have a moment." She dried her hands. She opened the door. Howe was standing in this hallway with his hat in his hands, which she had not seen before. She had seen him in the hat, and seen him without it, but she had not seen him holding it, and something about it made him seem less armored than usual. Less like the door that was closed, but not locked, and more like a man who was standing outside a door, deciding whether to knock. "The references checked out," he said. "I told you they would," she said. "You did." He looked at her for a moment. "Boarding house in Abilene. They said you were steady and honest and worked harder than anyone they'd had." "I tried to." "And the Harlan family." A slight pause. "Didn't get a response from Kansas City." Her heartbeat registered the pause. She kept her face even. "That's not surprising. The family relocated east. I don't know where they settled." He nodded slowly. He was still turning the hat brim in his hands. "The position is yours if you want it," he said. "Beyond the trial period. Terms are room and board and $12 a month." She looked at him. "That's fair," she said. "The men are better fed than they've been in 2 years," he said, which from him was clearly not a small thing to admit. "Elliot's eating again, which I hadn't managed to get him to do properly since—" He stopped. "Since a while back. He's a good boy," she said. Nathan looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, something shifted in his face that was not the careful reading expression she had grown accustomed to, not the closed-door quality, but something that was older and quieter and had been there longer than the ranch, or the responsibilities, or the grief. Something that looked like a man who was grateful and did not entirely know what to do with that. "Yes," he said. "He is." He put his hat back on. He said good night and walked down the hall, and she listened to his footsteps until they were gone, and then she went back into the kitchen and stood very still for a long moment. $12 a month. Room and board. Her own room with a lock and a kitchen. She was beginning to know as well as any kitchen she had worked in, and a boy who was eating again, and a ranch that was coming back to life in small ways she could feel but not quite see. She should leave. She knew she should leave. The rider on the ridgeline had not come back in 7 days, but that meant nothing. Absence was not safety. Absence was only the pause before the next thing. She stood in the kitchen, and she thought about running. And then she thought about that boy saying my parents died in that careful, flat voice. And she thought about the kitchen garden overgrown, but not dead. And she thought about the particular sound of a room full of men eating well, going briefly, wordlessly content. She walked to her room. She locked the door. She lay down on the bed. She did not sleep quickly this time, but she stayed. She stayed, and outside, the wind moved through the Montana dark, and the ranch breathed around her, and the suitcase under her bed held its secrets. And somewhere 3 miles south, Willow Creek slept without knowing that a woman with a locked suitcase and a 4-year secret had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. She had chosen to stay. She stayed. And staying, she discovered, was its own kind of danger, not the kind she had been running from for 4 years. Not the danger of men on ridgelines and false names and locked suitcases, but the quieter danger of a place that begins to feel like home before you have given yourself permission to want one. It started with small things, the way most significant changes do. The kitchen garden was the first. She had noticed it on her way to the compost bin, overgrown, yes, but the soil was good, and good soil remembered what it was supposed to grow. On her second Sunday at Raven Ridge, her one partial day without cooking obligations, she went out with a pair of work gloves she had borrowed from the tool shed, and she began clearing it. She did not ask permission. She simply began. She had been working for about an hour when she heard boots behind her. "That garden's been left 3 seasons, Nathan said. She did not look up. "I know. The soil's still good, though." A pause. "My wife planted it." She stopped then. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him, because that was the first time he had mentioned his wife in any context, and she understood that it had cost him something to say it and deserved acknowledgement. "I can leave it," she said. I was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the garden, the way people look at things that belong to someone they have lost. Not with grief exactly, because grief runs hot, but with the particular weight of long familiarity. "No," he said. "She would have hated seeing it go to waste." He walked away. She went back to clearing. By the 3rd week, she had 3 rows of it workable, and she had found seeds in the storage room that had been there long enough. She wasn't certain they would take, and she had planted them anyway, because good soil deserved the attempt. Elliot started coming to the kitchen every morning. It was not dramatic. He did not announce it. He simply appeared on the stool each day at around 7:15, after Nathan had gone out to the ranch, and before the hands had cleared their breakfast dishes, and he sat there while she worked on the midday prep, and he talked, or he didn't talk depending on the day. On the days he talked, she listened. He told her about his father, Nathan's younger brother, who had been a school teacher in Oregon, and who had taught Elliot to read before Elliot could fully remember being taught. It was simply something he had always known how to do, like breathing. And he said this with a kind of wondering pride that she recognized as the love of someone who can no longer say the love directly. He told her about his mother's apple cake, which was different from other apple cakes because she put cardamom in it, and nobody since had made it right. Clara said nothing about this. She simply filed it away. "You're quiet," Elliot said to her one morning in the tone of someone who means it as a compliment, but is not entirely sure how to deliver one. "I'm thinking," she said. "About what? Whether cardamom is still in that spice collection in the back of the pantry, or whether I used it for something else." He stared at her. She kept her face neutral. Then she went to the pantry and came back with a small jar and held it under his nose without a word. He smelled it and went very still. "I'll need an applesauce," she said. "There any orchards nearby?" "The Morrison property," he said quietly. "They sometimes sell in town." She nodded and went back to her prep work. He sat on the stool for another 20 minutes without saying anything, which was fine. Some mornings were like that. She made the apple cake on a Wednesday. She did not make it a special occasion. She set it on the table at the end of the evening meal like any other dessert, and she watched without appearing to watch as Elliot cut his slice and put it in his mouth and sat very still. He did not say anything. He cut another piece. At the other end of the table, Nathan had been in conversation with his foreman about the fence line on the eastern boundary, a topic that had occupied several days of table conversation. But he stopped mid-sentence when he tasted the cake. He looked at his plate. He looked at Elliot. Something passed between them, a look she couldn't fully translate, too private, too layered with shared history she wasn't part of, and Nathan turned to look at the kitchen doorway, where she was just visible through the pass-through. He did not say anything. She went back to the stove. But that night, after the dishes were done, she heard his footsteps stop outside the kitchen door, and then after a moment, move on. And she understood in the way she had learned to understand the things that went unspoken in this house, that it was the closest he knew how to come to saying thank you for something that mattered too much for words. The ranch hands had names now in her mind, and increasingly in her day. Holt, the senior hand, who was fair-minded and efficient, and had taken her measure in the first week, and seemed to have decided without fanfare that she was worth the space she occupied. Denny, who was 22, and ate more than any two other men, and apologized for it every morning as though it surprised him. Old Pete, who had worked the ranch for 11 years and remembered Nathan's wife, and sometimes in unguarded moments said so in small ways. She used to put mint in the lemonade, don't know where she found mint out here, but she always had it. And then caught himself and changed the subject, but not before Clara had filed it away. She was always filing things away. It was how she had survived 4 years of running, paying attention, storing information, understanding the shape of a place and its people before they fully understood her. She had done it in every household, every boarding house, every ranch she had passed through, and she did it here too, with the same quiet efficiency. What she had not accounted for was that Raven Ridge Ranch was paying attention back. She noticed it first with Holt. She had been at the ranch for 18 days when she went to the supply room to take inventory before her weekly order and found it had already been done. The list was on the table in Holt's handwriting, organized by category, with notations she recognized as responses to her own pattern of cooking. He had added a note next to the flour that said more than last time because of the bread, and next to the dried fruit he had written, "You'll want this for the next 2 weeks. Cold is coming." She stood there holding the list for a long moment. She was not accustomed to people noticing what she needed before she asked. She was not accustomed to people making things easier for her. She had been the one always doing the noticing, doing the making easier, because that was her role and her skill, and she was good at it. And it had never occurred to her, not clearly, not consciously, that she had been doing it alone. She took the list, and she made the order, and she did not say anything to Holt about it. But the next morning, she made him the specific coffee he had mentioned offhandedly 2 weeks ago that he had grown up drinking strong with chicory, the way his grandmother had made it in Louisiana, and she set it on the table without comment, and she heard him go quiet in the way people go quiet when something unexpected is kind. It was on the 20th day that the first real trouble arrived. She was aware of it before it walked through the door, the way she was always aware of shifts in the texture of a room. The hands came in for midday dinner, louder than usual, with a specific quality of loudness. Not the easy noise of men in good spirits, but the taut, clipped sound of men who have been discussing something unsettling and have not finished discussing it. She brought the food, and she listened. "Pearson's moved the survey markers again," Denny said, dropping into his seat with more force than usual. "Third time this season." "Third confirmed time," Holt said with the precision of a man who distinguishes between what he knows and what he suspects. "We saw it. Doesn't prove he moved them." "Who else moves survey markers?" "That's what a court would want to know," Holt said. "By the time it goes to court, he'll have moved the line another quarter mile." Silence fell across the table. The particular silence of men who are angry about something they feel unable to stop. And then Nathan walked in from outside, and the room recalibrated itself slightly. The way rooms always did when he entered. Not fear, nothing like that, but the particular attention that forms around a person who carries authority naturally. "Pearson," Nathan said, looking at Holt. "Yes, sir." Nathan sat down. He said nothing for a moment. She watched him from the kitchen doorway, and she saw the way his jaw set, not angry, not yet, but close, the way a sky goes close before weather. "What does he want?" Denny said. "He's already got 3,000 acres. "He wants the water access," old Pete said, and everyone went quiet again, because old Pete only spoke when something was obvious, and nobody else had said it yet. The eastern boundary of Raven Ridge sat along a creek that was one of the most reliable water sources in the region. She had heard it mentioned in passing a dozen times. She had not until this moment understood that it was the thing being argued over. "How long has this been going on?" she asked from the doorway. Several heads turned. She was aware she was overstepping slightly, asking a question at the wrong moment, but she had asked, and she could not unask it. Nathan looked at her. "Long enough," he said. "Since before the last survey was filed." Holt said more specifically. 2 years roughly. Started small, just boundary questions. Now it's—" He shook his head. "Now it's more than questions." She looked at Nathan. He was looking at his plate, and he was thinking she could see it, and she could also see that he was thinking with the particular closed-down quality of a man who has been thinking about the same problem for 2 years without finding an exit. She went back to the kitchen. That evening, after the hands had gone, she stood at the kitchen window and she thought about what she knew about land fraud. She thought about the journal under her bed. She thought about the 14 names and the pattern she had read in those few cold seconds of clarity in Warren Greer's study before she had understood she needed to run. Survey markers, boundary disputes, water access. It was not the same situation. She knew it was not the same situation. Pearson was a land-greedy neighbor, not a systematic operation like Greer's. But the shape of it, the way it worked, the slow pressure of it that she recognized. She did not say anything to Nathan, not yet. She was not ready to explain how she recognized it, and she could not offer knowledge without eventually explaining its source, and she was not ready for that conversation. She told herself she needed more time. She told herself she was still a trial employee, still someone who had no standing in the decisions of Raven Ridge Ranch. She told herself a great many things in the kitchen that evening. What she actually did was go to her room, unlock her suitcase, and read 3 pages of the journal she had been carrying for 4 years. She was looking for something specific, and she found it. The pattern in the journal. The systematic way. Greer's operation involved a first stage of boundary pressure survey manipulation and water access disputes that looked like ordinary neighbor conflicts but were not. They were designed to drive up legal costs, exhaust the property owner's resources, create a financial pressure point. Then came the second stage, a buyout offer at a fraction of the property's value presented as mercy as a way out. She closed the journal. She locked the suitcase. She sat on the edge of her bed and she breathed. She did not know if that was what was happening to Raven Ridge. She genuinely did not know. But she knew she needed to pay closer attention. What she did not know was that Nathan Cole had spent that same evening sitting at his desk in the study, reading through 2 years of correspondence with his attorney in Helena, and had arrived at a number that frightened him. A number of months. Specifically the number of months before the legal costs of defending the eastern boundary would begin to exceed what the ranch could sustain without borrowing. He had not told anyone this number. He did not tell Clara. But 3 days later she overheard it anyway. She was in the kitchen garden, which was becoming something. Now real rose, real growth. The first green shoots of the things she had planted from salvaged seeds. And Nathan was around the side of the house talking to a man she had not seen before. A man in a good coat and a clean hat, who was not a ranch hand and was not from Willow Creek, and who held himself with the careful pleasantness of someone whose profession required him to be trustworthy seeming. 14 months, Nathan said. That's what Henderson says. 14 months before the legal defense drains past what I can cover without taking on debt. Mr. Cole, said the man in the good coat. That's exactly why I'm here. Pearson's offer. Pearson's offer is half what this land is worth. Pearson's offer is what's on the table. Then it can stay on the table. Mr. Cole. A pause and the tone shifted slightly, the way tones shift when pleasantness is running low. I've come a long way from Helena. I'm asking you to consider. I've considered it, Nathan said. The answer is no, and I'd appreciate it if you'd take that back to whoever sent you. A longer pause. I'll pass along your position, the man said, and his voice had settled into something that was not a threat and was not a threat. She heard his horse a few minutes later, moving down the drive. She knelt in the garden and pressed her hands flat into the soil and tried to think. 14 months. A buyout offer at half value. An agent from Helena who had arrived without being announced. She thought about the journal. She thought about the third name on the front page. The name she had never been able to verify because she hadn't had access to the right records. A land acquisition operation out of Helena. That was what the journal said. Helena, Montana. 14 properties across 3 territories, all acquired below value. All preceded by the same pattern of boundary pressure and water disputes and legal attrition. She stood up. She walked into the house. She knocked on the study door. "Come in," Nathan said. She opened the door. He was still standing by the window, and he looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has just had an unpleasant conversation and is not certain he is ready for another. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "The man who just left, who was he?" Nathan looked at her steadily. "Why, I heard part of your conversation," she said. "I wasn't trying to. I was in the garden." He was quiet. "The offer from Pearson," she said. "Has it changed in the last 6 months? Has the amount gone up or down?" His eyes shifted. "Down," he said after a moment. "It was 60% of assessed value 8 months ago. It's 50 now. And before that, 70. 2 years ago when this started." She felt the cold arrive in her hands again. Decreasing. The offer was decreasing as the legal costs increased. That was the pattern. That was exactly the pattern. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, "do you know who Pearson is connected to? Not Pearson himself, the people behind the offer." He was looking at her differently now. Not the reading look, not the careful assessment. She had grown accustomed to something sharper. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I think this isn't about Pearson," she said. "I think Pearson is the visible part of something larger. And if that's true, it changes how you fight it." The silence stretched. "Clara," he said quietly, and it was the first time he had used her name without Miss in front of it, and neither of them remarked on it. "What do you know about land fraud?" She had 4 years of practice at keeping her face still. "Some," she said. "Enough to recognize a pattern." "Where did you learn it?" "I worked in a household once," she said, "where I learned more than I was supposed to know." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "How much trouble are you in?" She felt the question land somewhere in her chest. Not because it frightened her, she had been frightened before, but because no one had asked it that directly. Not in 4 years. Every place she had been, people had either not noticed, or had noticed and pretended not to, or had noticed and used it against her. No one had simply asked. She said, "Enough that I've been careful about staying anywhere too long." He was quiet. "Does it have anything to do with what's happening to my ranch?" he said. "I don't know," she said. "Honest. I genuinely don't know yet." He looked at her for a long time. She held the look. "All right," he said finally. "All right," she said. "All right," he said again. "Figure it out. If you need access to my records, correspondence, the survey filings, anything, ask Holt. He'll get it for you." She stared at him. "You're trusting me with that. You haven't given me a reason not to yet," he said. And then with a quietness that was not soft, but was not hard either. "And whatever you're running from Miss Whitmore, you're standing still right now. That counts for something in my experience." She walked back to the kitchen. She stood at the work table and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed. It was the 23rd day. She had stayed because she had told herself she was choosing it, that she was in control of the decision, that she could leave if she needed to. She had told herself that right up until this moment, when a man with winter water eyes had just looked at her with clear, uncomplicated trust, and told her that standing still counted for something, and she felt that land in her chest like something she had been hungry for without knowing it had a name. She was not leaving. She did not know yet if that was courage or something more dangerous. She pulled the first of Nathan's survey filings toward her, and she began to read. It took her 3 evenings of reading after supper with Holt, supplying boxes of correspondence from the study archive, and asking no questions about why she wanted them. On the 3rd evening she found what she was looking for. It was not obvious. It was buried in the paper trail, the way important things always were in the name of a land acquisition firm, filed as a third-party observer in the original boundary dispute, easily overlooked unless you were looking for it. 3 words in a document that was mostly numbers: Meridian Land Associates. She sat at the kitchen table with the document in front of her and her hands going cold for the 3rd time in 4 years. Meridian Land Associates was one of the names in the journal. It was not Greer's operation directly. It was associated, a subsidiary. A partner. She had not fully understood the structure from what she had read, but the name was in the journal. She was certain of it. She had read that journal so many times that she knew it, the way she knew the spice jars by smell. She put the document face down on the table. She put her hands in her lap. She sat for a long time, and then she stood up and she walked to her room and she unlocked her suitcase and she took out the journal and she brought it back to the kitchen table and she opened it and she found the page, and there it was. Meridian Land Associates, Helena, Montana. It was the same. The trouble she had been running from for 4 years had been here before her, had already been working its way through the survey records of Raven Ridge Ranch before she had ever stepped off the stagecoach in Willow Creek. She looked at the journal. She looked at the survey document. She had come here to hide. She had walked directly into the center of the thing she was hiding from. The sound she made was not a laugh, and not a cry, and not quite either, and she was grateful there was no one in the kitchen to hear it. She closed the journal. She put it on the table next to the survey document, and she sat there for a long time, thinking about what it meant that the danger had been here, first thinking about what it meant that the pattern she recognized was already working against the ranch. Thinking about what it meant that a man who had trusted her with his records was about to lose everything, unless someone with the journal and the information and the 4 years of terrible, costly experience stood up and said, "I know what this is. I know how this works, and I am not running anymore." She did not decide it all at once. But she sat in the kitchen of Raven Ridge Ranch until the lamp burned low with the journal on one side and the survey documents on the other, and she thought. And slowly, the way light comes back in the morning, not all at once, but edging in around the dark, the shape of what she was going to do began to form. She was not leaving. She was not hiding. She was going to have to tell Nathan Cole the truth. All of it. And she was going to have to do it before whoever was on that ridgeline 8 days ago came back with company. Outside, the Montana wind moved across the open land, and the kitchen lamp guttered and held, and Clara Whitmore sat at the table with her hands steady for the first time in 4 years, and she waited for morning. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table until the lamp burned down to nothing, and the darkness came in full around her, and she let it, because the dark was honest. At least it did not pretend to be something other than what it was. She sat with the journal on one side and the survey documents on the other, and she turned over every version of the conversation she was about to have with Nathan Cole, and none of them were good, and she had known that before she started, but she turned them over anyway, because that was the only thing she could do until morning. The problem was not telling him. She had decided to tell him. That decision had a strange, settled quality she recognized as the particular piece that comes after you stop fighting a thing you were going to do anyway. The problem was what came after. If she showed Nathan the journal, if she told him that the operation targeting his ranch was connected to the same network she had been running from for 4 years. Then she was no longer a cook at Raven Ridge Ranch with a secret locked in a suitcase. She was a witness. She was evidence. She was the reason men had been watching his property from tree lines. She was the reason his ranch was in danger. She turned that over too. She turned it over for a long time. At 4:30, she got up and lit the stove and started the biscuits because the hands would need to eat regardless of what the day brought, and the rhythm of it helped her. The measuring, the mixing, the particular muscle memory of hands that had made biscuits in 100 different kitchens. She was still at the stove when she heard Nathan's boots in the hall earlier than usual, and she braced herself. He came through the kitchen door and stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the table where the survey documents were still stacked, and the journal was face down on top of them. His eyes came back to her face. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No," she said. He looked at the journal again. "Is that what I think it is?" That depends on what you think it is. Something you've been carrying a long time, he said. Something important. She turned from the stove. She looked at him directly. Nathan, she said, and his name without the title felt strange in her mouth, but correct the way a key feels when it finally fits a lock. I need to tell you something, all of it. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything, because if I stop, I'm not sure I'll start again. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table and folded his hands in front of him, with the particular stillness of a man who knows how to wait. She told him. She told him about Denver and Warren Greer and the journal falling from behind the desk. She told him about the page she had read in those few seconds of cold clarity. The names, the pattern, the 14 ranch families documented in careful ink as acquisitions. She told him about the investigator who had dismissed her in 45 seconds, and the understanding she'd arrived at before she reached the building's door, that Greer's reach was longer than she had thought. She told him about 4 years of false names and 6-month stays, and always calculating which direction was away. She told him about the letter she had sent to the federal marshal in Cheyenne, unsigned, that she had never known if anyone had read. She told him about the rider on the ridgeline 8 days ago that she had not told him about because she had been telling herself it was nothing. She turned over the journal and pushed it across the table to him. Meridian Land Associates, she said. Page 11, and then look at the survey document on the bottom of that stack. Third-party observer on the original boundary filing. He looked. She watched his face while he read. I was quiet for a long time. She had expected anger not directed at her exactly, but the kind of anger that needs somewhere to go and takes the nearest available direction. What she saw instead was something harder and quieter, the expression of a man absorbing a large, painful truth and making room for it without flinching. They were already here, he said finally. Yes. Before you arrived. I came here by chance. I didn't know. I need you to understand that I didn't know Nathan. I picked Willow Creek because it was far from Denver, and the stagecoach stopped here, and I needed work, and if I had known what was already happening to your ranch, I would have... She stopped. You would have what, he said. He was looking at her now, not at the journal. She did not finish the sentence because the honest ending was, I would have kept running, and she did not know anymore if that was true. She did not know when it had stopped being entirely true. I'm sorry, she said instead. The risk that's following me, you didn't choose it. Your ranch didn't choose it. That's on me. Clara. His voice was steady and low, and had something in it that was not anger and was not sympathy, but was the specific quality of a man who needs another person to hear something clearly. Look at the date on that survey filing. She looked. She knew what date it was. She had read it 3 times the night before. That's 2 years before you arrived here, he said. Whatever is coming for this ranch was coming long before you stepped off that stagecoach. You didn't bring this to Raven Ridge. You brought me the evidence that explains what was already here. She held the look he was giving her. That's a different thing, he said. She did not trust herself to respond, so she did not. He turned back to the journal. He read for several more minutes in silence, with the careful, methodical attention of a man who reads contracts and survey documents and understands the language of things that mean to take from you what is yours. She watched him turn pages and watched his jaw set and release and set again, and she waited. Then he closed the journal. He stood up. I need Holt, he said. She stood too. Nathan, if you go to the territorial authorities... I'm not going to the territorial authorities, he said. Not yet. I'm going to find out who was on that ridgeline. That's more dangerous. Less dangerous than filing a complaint through channels that Meridian Land Associates may already have a hand in. He said it without inflection, like a man stating the weather. Which is possible based on what I'm reading in this journal. She stared at him. He was right. She knew he was right. The journal documented 2 instances of territorial officials appearing in the record as cooperative witnesses, and she had read those pages enough times to have them memorized. What are you going to do? She said. I'm going to handle it the way I handle things on this ranch, he said, carefully and without giving anyone advance warning. He picked up his hat from the peg by the kitchen door. Keep the journal locked up. Don't take it out of your room until I tell you it's time. He went out. She stood in the kitchen with the biscuits going golden in the oven, and the morning coming through the window, and the particular feeling of someone who has put down a weight they did not know they could put down. It lasted approximately 4 hours. At 10 in the morning, Holt came to the kitchen door and knocked with his knuckle twice, which was not his usual way. "Something's happened," he said when she opened it. The rider on the ridgeline had not been alone. Holt had found evidence of a camp cold 3 days old in the tree line to the east, roughly a quarter-mile from the spot she had seen the silhouette. 3 men by the sign of it, possibly 4. They had been watching the property long enough to go through significant provisions, and they had not been trying particularly hard to conceal themselves, which Holt said meant one of 2 things. Either they were amateurs, which he doubted, or they were not concerned about being found because they did not intend to be here much longer. "Which means they're close to moving," Clara said. "That's what Mr. Cole thinks," Holt said. "Moving to what?" Holt was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Cole thinks they're waiting for a signal, from someone closer in." She felt that land. "Closer in," she said. "Someone connected to the legal pressure, the survey disputes." That's the thinking. She thought of the man in the good coat from Helena. She thought of his particular pleasantness and the way it had thinned when Nathan said no. "Holt," she said, "when did that man from Helena leave the one with the acquisition offer?" 4 days ago. 4 days. And the camp in the tree line was 3 days old. "He didn't go back to Helena," she said. Holt looked at her for a long moment with an expression that told her he had already arrived at this conclusion and had not wanted to say it directly. "Mr. Cole is handling it," he said. "I know," she said. "I know he is." She did not feel reassured. She felt the cold in her hands that had become her body's specific warning, the one she had learned to trust over 4 years because it had never been wrong. She went back to her prep work, and she moved through the day with the focused efficiency she had always used as armor, and she was quiet, and she was careful, and she waited. Nathan came back in at midday, ate quickly, and said 3 words to her on his way back out. "Don't go outside." She stayed inside. At 3 in the afternoon she heard horses on the drive. Not ranch horses. The rhythm was different, the number was wrong. Too many for returning hands, and they were moving at the wrong pace for working animals. She looked through the kitchen window without going to it, and she saw 3 men dismounting at the front of the house. One of them was the man in the good coat from Helena. The other 2 were not the kind of men who wore good coats. Her hands went cold. She moved. She went to her room, and she was under the bed with the suitcase in her hands and back on her feet in less time than it took her heart to register what she was doing. She stood in the middle of her room with the suitcase gripped in both hands, and she listened. She heard voices at the front of the house, Nathan's level and unhurried, and the Helena man's which had lost its careful pleasantness entirely, and was now something harder. She could not hear words through the walls, but she could hear tone, and the tone was a confrontation that had been scheduled, not a surprise. Hein knew they were coming. Nathan had known they were coming, and he had not told her, and she had 2 seconds to decide whether that was a problem or a plan, before she heard boots on the back steps and the kitchen door open, and Holt's voice low and fast. "Miss Whitmore." She came out of her room. Holt looked at the suitcase in her hands, and his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of a man incorporating new information. "Mr. Cole needs you to go out the back," he said. "Where is he?" "At the front, keeping them talking." "How long can he keep them talking?" "Long enough if you move now." "Holt, what do they want?" Holt looked at her with the direct, unembellished honesty of a man she had understood to be fair-minded from her first week, and who had not yet given her a reason to doubt it. "You," he said, "and whatever's in that case." She thought she had been prepared for this. She had been preparing for this for 4 years. She had run through versions of this moment in every town, every house, every room, with a locked door, had planned her exits and memorized her routes and kept herself ready. She was not, she discovered, prepared. She was not prepared because this time there was a kitchen that she had organized, and a garden that was growing, and a boy who ate apple cake with his uncle's eyes gone briefly soft, and a man at the front of the house, keeping 3 dangerous men, talking specifically to give her time to run. She stood in the kitchen of Raven Ridge Ranch, and she did not move for 3 full seconds. Then she set the suitcase on this kitchen table. "I'm not going," she said. Holt went very still. "Miss Whitmore." "I am not going," she said clearly, and she looked at him, so he understood she was not confused about what she was saying. "If they want me and the journal, they can come through the front of this house like human beings, and Nathan can hear every word that gets said." Holt stared at her. "Get him," she said. "Tell him to bring them in here." "That is not what Mr. Cole—" "I know it's not what he planned," she said. "Tell him anyway." A beat. Holt went. She put the suitcase on the kitchen table, and she opened it, and she took out the journal, and she put it in her apron pocket. Then she went to the stove, and she put the kettle on, because she had learned over 4 years that the most disarming thing in any tense situation was an ordinary action performed without apology. She heard them come down the hall 30 seconds later. Nathan's voice sharp with something he was managing tightly, and the Helena man's voice, and the sound of boots that did not belong to ranch hands. She straightened her spine. She turned to face the door. Nathan came through first. He saw her standing at the stove, and his expression did something complicated in the space of a second: relief and anger, and the particular look of a man confronting a situation that has not gone the way he intended. He said nothing. He moved to the side of the room. The Helena man came through next. He was exactly as she remembered. Good coat, clean hat, the pleasant face that had run out of pleasantness, and he looked at her with the cold, assessing quality of someone who has found what he was looking for and is now deciding how to handle the acquisition. The two men behind him were large and quiet, and had the specific stillness of men who were paid to be still until they were needed. "Miss Whitmore," the Helena man said. "Or is it Miss Whitmore today?" "It's always been Whitmore," she said. "The first name I vary depending on whether I think the room I'm in is safe." "Careful woman." "A live woman," she said. "Which is the intended outcome." He smiled, and it did not reach anything above his mouth. "We've been looking for you for some time." "I know," she said. "That's why I kept moving." "You have something that belongs to Mr. Greer. I have something that belongs to 14 ranch families across 3 territories," she said, "and to a federal court when someone with the appropriate authority reads it." He took a slow breath. "That document was obtained illegally." "That document fell off a desk," she said. "I picked it up. That's not illegal. What's in it is." "Your word," he said, "against a man of considerable standing." "My word," she said, "and a very detailed journal in Mr. Greer's own handwriting, and a land acquisition record, filed in this county 2 years ago, by Meridian Land Associates, and a camp in the eastern tree line that your men have been running for 3 days, which Mr. Cole's foreman has documented, and which represents trespass on private property." She paused. "Would you like more, or is that sufficient for the moment?" The room was very quiet. Nathan was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. The Helena man was looking at her with the expression of a man recalculating. "You've been busy," the Helena man said. "I've been cooking," she said. "I think while I cook." He looked at her for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to Nathan. "Mr. Cole, this woman is a liability. Whatever she's told you, whatever she's shown you, I'd encourage you strongly to consider." "She's shown me enough," Nathan said, and his voice was very quiet and very even, which she had learned meant he was at the far end of his patience. "She's shown me 14 names in acquisition record and a pattern of land fraud that a federal investigator is going to find very interesting. And she's shown me that the offer you brought me 6 days ago came with a camp of armed men in my tree line, which changes the nature of that offer considerably." The Helena man was quiet. "You're going to leave my property," Nathan said. "You and your men. You're going to ride back to Helena, and you're going to tell Warren Greer that this ranch is not available, that the woman he's been hunting for 4 years is under my protection, and that if anyone sets foot on my land again without invitation, I will personally accompany Clara Whitmore and her journal to the federal court in Helena and make an afternoon of it." A silence fell that had real weight in it. "You don't understand what you're involving yourself in," the Helena man said. "No," Nathan said. "I don't think you understand what you've involved yourself in." The 2 quiet men in the back of the room shifted slightly. Nathan did not look at them. He was looking at the Helena man with winter-water eyes that had nothing movable behind them. The Helena man looked at Clara. She looked back. He looked at the suitcase on the table. He looked at her apron pocket where the journal was. Then he put his hat back on. "We'll be in contact," he said. "No," Nathan said. "You won't." They left. The sound of their horses going down the drive was the most beautiful thing she had heard since she had arrived in Montana. She stood at the stove with the kettle beginning to whistle behind her, and she did not move for a long moment. Then Nathan said quietly, "You were supposed to go out the back." "I know," she said. "Holt was supposed to get you clear." "I know. Clara." His voice was not angry. It was something close to exasperated and something close to something else she couldn't name. "Why?" She turned around. She looked at him across the kitchen that she had organized from chaos, where the spice jars were labeled now, and the pantry made sense, and the stove's damper had been repaired by Holt 3 weeks ago because she had mentioned it needed doing. She looked at him, and she thought about the boy eating apple cake in the kitchen garden, and the supply list with the notation more than last time because of the bread. "Because I'm not running anymore," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "All right," he said finally. It was the same word he had used when she had told him she needed to look at his records, the same simple, unconditional acceptance that had undone her then and was doing something similar now. "They'll come back," she said. "Not those men maybe, but others. Greer doesn't give up. He's been looking for me for 4 years." "I know," Nathan said. "This isn't going to be settled by one conversation." "I know that too. Nathan." She said his name the way she had learned to say it without the title which had stopped fitting weeks ago. "You could still walk away from this. File the boundary disputes, pay the legal costs, give up the eastern access rather than the whole ranch. It would cost you, but it wouldn't cost you everything. You didn't sign on for a federal fraud case." He looked at her steadily. "Neither did you," he said. "And yet here you are." She had no answer for that. He picked up his hat from where he had set it on the kitchen table when he came in. He looked at the suitcase, still open, the journal gone from it, and sitting in her apron pocket. He looked at her. "We need to talk to a federal investigator," he said. "Not a territorial office. Federal. Someone whose jurisdiction is above Greer's reach." "I tried that once," she said. "In Denver." "Denver's not Helena," he said. "And you're not alone this time." She heard that. She heard it in the specific way you hear something that has been true for a while before you had language for it. "All right," she said. He nodded. "I'll write to a contact in Helena tonight. A man I trust, not a government appointment, a lawyer who does federal work, and who doesn't owe anything to land acquisition firms." He moved toward the door and then stopped. "Clara." She looked up. "The next time I have a plan," he said, "and the plan involves you going out the back, I'd appreciate it if you went out the back." It was so close to something wry, something almost warm, that she almost smiled. "I'll consider it," she said. He shook his head slightly and went out. She stood in the kitchen alone. She reached into her apron pocket and felt the journal there, worn at the corners. The spine cracked from 4 years of travel, carrying its terrible cargo of 14 names and 20 pages of proof. She had carried it so long it had become part of the weight of herself. Something she no longer noticed, except in moments like this one when she was aware of it, the way you are aware of your own heartbeat. She put the kettle off the heat. She started the supper preparations because the hands would need to eat. But for the first time in 4 years, she was thinking forward instead of sideways, not about the next exit, not about the next false name, or the next town, or the next locked door, but about Helena and a federal lawyer and what it would mean to finally, after 4 years, put the journal in the hands of someone with the authority to act on it. She did not hear Elliot come into the kitchen until he was already on the stool. She looked at him. He was watching her with the steady, careful eyes that sometimes reminded her of Nathan, and sometimes reminded her of no one but himself. "The men who came," he said. "Are we in trouble?" She considered lying. She considered a comfortable reassurance that would be easier than the truth and less useful. "We have a problem," she said. Your uncle and I are working on solving it. Howe was quiet for a moment. Is it bad? It's serious, she said. There's a difference. He thought about this. My father used to say that serious problems are the only ones worth having, he said, because those are the ones where the solution actually matters. She looked at this boy across the kitchen and felt something she did not have a complete name for, something between tenderness and recognition, and the particular ache of loving something you are afraid to keep. Your father sounds like he was a very smart man, she said. He was, Elliot said. She nodded and went back to her work. Outside, she heard Nathan's voice across the yard, talking to Holt low and measured and moving toward a decision. She heard the hands starting to come in from the day. She heard the ranch settling back into its regular rhythm after the disruption of the afternoon, the way a body resettles after a shock, not unaware, not unchanged, but present and continuing. She had one more thing to do before supper. She went to her room and she unlocked the suitcase and she took out the 3 pages she had copied 18 months ago in a reading room in Cheyenne from the county courthouse records that corroborated the journal's claim, the documents she had never sent because she hadn't trusted anyone to receive them. She brought them back to the kitchen and she put them with the journal in the locked compartment of the suitcase she carried always. Then she sat down and she wrote a letter. Not to a federal marshal this time. Not unsigned. A letter to a federal circuit court attorney in Helena, Montana, giving a name she had found in the journal that she had never shared with anyone. A specific name, a specific account record, a specific courthouse document number, enough that a lawyer who was not already compromised would know immediately that the information was real. She signed it with her real name, Clara Whitmore. Her hand shook slightly when she wrote it. Not from fear exactly, or not only from fear. From the understanding that signing your real name to a thing means you are not running from it anymore. It means you are standing in front of it in the light with your hands open. She folded the letter. She sealed it. She put it in her apron pocket next to the journal. She got up and she started supper, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something warm and good, and outside the day wound down toward dark, and somewhere in the tree line to the east, the camp that had held 3 men for 3 days stood cold and empty. They had gone. But she knew with the certainty she had learned to trust that gone was not finished. The real reckoning had not arrived yet. It was simply on its way. The letter went out with the morning rider on a Thursday, and Clara spent the next 4 days pretending she was not counting hours. She cooked. She tended the kitchen garden, which had real growth, now green rows that were unmistakably something rather than the tentative maybe of the early shoots. She labeled 3 more spice jars and reorganized the cold storage and taught Elliot on a quiet Saturday morning how to properly sharpen a kitchen knife, which he approached with the focused seriousness he brought to everything and which made Holt, passing through, shake his head and mutter something about the boy having better knife technique than half the hands already. She did ordinary things because ordinary things were what she had. The extraordinary things were in motion and beyond her control for the moment, which was the particular torture of having finally stopped running. You discovered that standing still had its own version of helplessness. Nathan sent a telegraph to his contact in Helena the same day the letter went out. He did not tell her the exact content, but he told her the attorney's name, James Alderton. Federal circuit work, primarily property and fraud, had appeared twice as opposing counsel in cases involving Meridian Land Associates, which meant he knew the name and its habits, and had already lost business because of his refusal to work with them. He'll want to meet in Helena, Nathan said on Thursday evening after supper had been cleared and the house had gone quiet. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, which had become. Clara noticed where he tended to appear when he wanted to talk about something significant. Not at the table, not formally, but in the doorway, as though leaving himself an exit was important. When? She asked. 2 weeks if he responds. He may want sooner. He paused. You'd need to come. I know, she said. You'd need to bring the journal. I know that too. He looked at her. It means traveling. 3 days each way by coach. Your name on a passenger record. She had thought about this. She had thought about it for 4 nights. My name's been on records before, she said. I just moved before anyone could use them. This time I don't have to move. Because Alderton can file for federal protection once he takes the case, Nathan said. Once the journal is in federal hands, Greer can't recover it through private means. He'd have to argue in open court, which means his name in the record, which is the last thing he wants. That's the theory, she said. You don't trust theories. I trust evidence, she said. I've been the theory before. I was the theory in Denver, and the theory didn't protect me. Nathan was quiet. He looked at his hands, which were resting on the doorframe, and then he looked at her. This is different, he said. Because in Denver, you were alone, he said. And this time, the journal isn't just about 14 families in 3 territories. This time, it's connected to an active fraud operation on a documented Montana property, with a sitting landowner with corroborating survey records, with a trespass violation and an unsolicited acquisition approach that I can personally testify to. He said it without heat, laying it out the way a man lays out the components of a problem he has solved. Alderton won't be protecting just you. He'll be protecting me and this ranch and every piece of land Meridian has marked in this territory. That's a different case than a cook with a stolen journal. She heard the precision of it. She heard the way he had laid it out, not to reassure her, but to show her the structural truth of it, because he had understood somewhere in the last 4 weeks that she was not someone who needed comfort. She was someone who needed clear information. You've been thinking about this a long time, she said. I've had 4 years of a different problem, he said. I've been thinking about this particular version of it for 3 weeks, ever since you knocked on my study door. She held his gaze. All right, she said. He nodded. He started to turn away, and then he stopped, which was something he did. Started to leave a room, and then stopped, as though he perpetually thought of one more thing at the last possible moment. Clara, he said. She looked at him. What you did in that kitchen, he said. When I told you to go out the back and you didn't. I want you to know I was not angry. I was afraid for you. Those are different things, and I should have said so sooner. She stood very still. I know, she said after a moment. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after his footsteps faded. The response from James Alderton arrived on a Tuesday, 6 days after the letter and telegraph had gone out. It was brief, precise, and asked for a meeting in Helena at the earliest possible date. Attached to his response was a single line that Clara read 3 times. I am already aware of the name Meridian Land Associates. I have been aware of it for 18 months. I have been waiting for a witness. She brought it to Nathan without saying anything. She set it on the desk in front of him and watched him read it and watched something shift in his face. Not relief, because Nathan Cole did not appear to experience relief the way other people did, but the particular settling that comes when the direction you committed to turns out to have been the right one. 18 months, he said. He's been building a case, she said. Without a witness, without the journal, he hasn't been able to move. Until now. Until now. He looked at the letter once more. Then he folded it and put it in the desk drawer and locked it, and he looked up at her. We leave Friday, he said. I'll arrange the coach. Holt will manage the ranch. Elliot comes with us. She blinked. Nathan, I'm not leaving him here alone with Holt and 12 ranch hands, he said with the mild finality of a man who had already thought this through. He'll be fine on the coach. He's traveled before. She thought about arguing. She thought about the fact that taking an 11-year-old boy into a situation that might involve federal proceedings and the men who had sent the Helena agent to their door was not without risk. She thought about Elliot on the stool, saying, my father used to say that serious problems are the only ones worth having. All right, she said. Friday arrived the way important days tend to, faster than expected and heavier than the days before it. She packed her suitcase with 4 days of clothing on top and the journal wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom. She locked it. She put it by the kitchen door. She made breakfast for the hands at 5:30, the same as every morning, because the ranch needed to eat whether she was leaving or not, and because cooking breakfast for the last time in a kitchen that had become hers was something she needed to do properly, not quickly. Holt stood in the doorway while she worked and watched without speaking, which was Holt's particular way of saying he understood what was happening without requiring it to be said aloud. You'll be careful, he said finally. Always, she said. I mean with him, Holt said. She paused. She looked at Holt, who was looking at a point somewhat to the left of her face, in the way of a man who is saying something personal and preserving both parties' dignity by not making direct eye contact. She went back to the biscuits. I know what you mean, she said. He hasn't. Holt stopped, reconsidered. He doesn't do things without thinking them through. Coming with you putting the ranch into this, he's thought it through. I know, she said. I just want you to understand that, Holt said. He's not doing this out of... Another pause. He's not doing it out of principle alone. She set the biscuit pan in the oven. She stood with her back to Holt for a moment. Holt, she said. Miss Whitmore. Go manage the fence line. A short silence. Yes, ma'am, he said, and she heard something in it that was as close to amusement as Holt permitted himself before 8 in the morning, and then his boots went back down the hall. The coach to Helena took 3 days, as Nathan had said, with 2 overnight stops at way stations. Clara had traveled enough to understand the mathematics of coach travel, the way time compresses and expands the way. Discomfort becomes something you simply inhabit, rather than fight. The way you learn very quickly which fellow passengers are going to be difficult and which are going to be invisible. She had not traveled with Nathan Cole before. How has she discovered a good traveler patient with delays, uncomplaining about conditions, capable of sitting in silence for hours without it becoming uncomfortable? He read. He watched the country out the window with the particular attention of someone who spends most of their life outdoors and has not lost the habit of noticing it. He answered Elliot's questions about geography and terrain and the occasional town they passed through with the exact right amount of information. Not so little that it dismissed the question, not so much that it became a lecture. Elliot, for his part, managed the 2-day journey with the self-possession of a boy who had survived worse inconveniences than a dusty coach and was not going to complain about this one. On the second afternoon, somewhere between the way station and the next rise, Elliot fell asleep against Nathan's shoulder, and Nathan looked down at the boy with an expression Clara had never seen on him before, unguarded in the way faces go when the person wearing them does not know they are being observed. It was not complicated. It was simply love, the plain, responsible, daily kind that does not announce itself, that shows up in practical choices. Choices. I'm not leaving him behind. He comes with us and asks nothing back. She looked away. She looked at the country going past the window. She thought about what Holt had said in the kitchen that morning, and she thought about 4 years of traveling alone with a suitcase and no one to watch while she slept, and she did not let herself think about what came after Helena, because she had learned a long time ago that thinking past the immediate thing was how you lost your grip on the immediate thing. Helena. The journal. James Alderton. Those were the immediate things. She kept them in the front of her mind and let the country go past, and did not think about what it meant that Nathan's sleeve was touching her sleeve in the narrow confines of the coach seat, and that she had not moved away from it for the last 40 miles. Helena was larger than Willow Creek by a factor that made Willow Creek feel briefly like a village. Clara felt the city differently than she had felt it before, not with the familiar calculating assessment of someone picking an exit route, but with something closer to interest. She noticed things she would not have noticed in running mode: the width of the main thoroughfare, the quality of the buildings on the Federal District side of town, the particular density of commercial activity that indicated a city with real economic function, rather than the boom and bust fragility she had seen in some Western towns. She also noticed within the first 2 hours that they were being watched. Not by the obvious men on ridgelines kind of watching. Subtler. A man at the hotel counter who took slightly too long to look away when Nathan gave the name. A figure outside the hotel window the following morning that moved when she appeared at the glass. She told Nathan at breakfast. He listened without interrupting. He drank his coffee. He said, "Alderton knows. I telegraphed him last night that we'd arrived. He's moving the meeting to this morning." "How did you telegraph without Nathan if they're watching the telegraph office?" "I used Elliot," he said. She stared at him. "He's 11, Nathan said, and he walks like he's going to the candy store. Nobody watches an 11-year-old going to the candy store." Elliot across the table was eating his eggs with serene unconcern. She looked at the boy. She looked at Nathan. You sent him alone. I walked him to the corner and watched the whole way, Nathan said. He was never out of my sight. Does he know what the message said? I told him it was ranch business, Nathan said. Elliot looked up. I know it wasn't ranch business, he said. I'm not 6. A silence. No, Nathan said. You're not. And something passed between them again that layered private look, and Nathan said, We'll tell you everything after the meeting. That's a promise. Elliot went back to his eggs. All right, he said. James Alderton was a lean man in his mid-50s, with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in rooms where words have exact legal weight and learned to choose every one of them carefully. He had an office on the Federal District Street second floor, with a view of the territorial courthouse that she understood was not accidental. He stood when they came in, and he shook Nathan's hand, and then he looked at Clara with sharp, clear eyes that did not perform assessment. He had already assessed, she understood before they had sat down. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Alderton. You have the journal. She reached into her coat and put it on his desk. He looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then he looked at her. Before I open this, he said, I need to know something. When you found it was the study locked? No. Were you authorized to be in the study? I was authorized to clean it. I was not authorized to read private papers, but I didn't seek them out. The journal fell from behind the desk. I was replacing it. Did you take it the same night? Yes. Did you take anything else? No. He held her eyes for a moment longer, then picked up the journal. He opened it. He read in silence for 3 minutes, which felt much longer, and his face did nothing remarkable, except for a slight tightening around his eyes at the 3rd page that told her he had found what he was looking for. The Meridian Land Associates reference, he said, not looking up. Page 11. Yes. He turned to page 11. He read. He set the journal down and looked at Nathan. You have the survey filing. Nathan produced the document from his coat pocket, the one with the third-party observer notation, and put it on the desk beside the journal. Alderton looked at both documents together. He said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, I'm going to need copies of the survey records going back 3 years. All of them. And the correspondence with your previous attorney. I have them, Nathan said. The acquisition offer, the written one if there was one. There was. I have it. Alderton looked at Clara. The account record you mentioned in your letter. The courthouse document number. She had memorized it 18 months ago in Cheyenne. She wrote it on the paper he slid across the desk to her. He looked at the number. He set the paper down very carefully. He interlaced his fingers on the desk, and he looked at both of them. I want to tell you something, he said. Something I want you to understand clearly, so there are no surprises. He paused. What I have in front of me, the journal, the survey record, the account documentation, is enough to initiate a federal fraud proceeding. Not guarantee one, not win one, initiate. He let that land. What it becomes from here depends on corroborating witnesses, on how fast we can move before anyone has time to move the relevant records, and on the willingness of this territorial court to accept federal jurisdiction over what Greer's attorneys will argue is a private property dispute. And if the territorial court resists, Nathan said. Then we go above the territorial court, Alderton said. Which I am prepared to do. But I want you to understand it will not be fast, and it will not be without cost. How much cost? Nathan said. To you, financially less than you'd think, because federal fraud proceedings carry their own filing mechanism. To you personally. Alderton looked at them both. These are men who have been operating in 3 territories for years without consequence. They are not going to accept a federal challenge quietly. They haven't been quiet already, Clara said. There was a camp in my employer's tree line for 3 days. 3 armed men. I know, Alderton said. That's actually useful trespass on a documented property associated with an acquisition approach in the same time frame as the federal filing. It establishes a pattern of intimidation that supports the fraud case. He leaned back slightly. Miss Whitmore, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead, she said. Are you willing to be named as the originating witness in this proceeding? Your real name on the record as the person who found and retained this document? She had known this was coming. She had known it since she had signed the letter with her real name, since she had understood that standing still meant standing visible. She thought about 4 years. She thought about the cold in her hands, and the false names, and the locked suitcase, and the rider on the ridgeline. She thought about Denver, and the federal investigator who had dismissed her in 45 seconds. She thought about Nathan standing in the kitchen doorway, the morning the Helena agent came saying, "If they want you, they come through the front of this house." "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." Alderton nodded once. He picked up a pen. "Then we begin." What followed was 3 hours of the most precise conversation she had ever participated in. Alderton was methodical in the way of a man who has learned that sloppiness in the early stages of a proceeding creates catastrophic problems in the late stages, and he asked questions she had not anticipated about the specific physical condition of the journal when she found it, about the lighting in the study, about whether she could name any other person who had been in the Greer household during the relevant period who might corroborate the journal's presence. She could. There had been a housekeeper, a woman named Dorothea, who had worked for Greer for 11 years, and who had told Clara in the kitchen, with the particular confidentiality of 2 women doing domestic work in a wealthy household, that she did not much care for Mr. Greer's business partners, because they came to the house at night and left before morning, and one of them had made her deeply uneasy. She did not know where Dorothea was now, but she knew her last name, and she knew the neighborhood she had said she had family in, and Alderton wrote it down with the focused attention of a man adding a brick to a wall. They were finishing when the door to Alderton's office opened. Not knocked. Opened. The way a door opens when the person on the other side of it does not feel the need to request entry. The man who came in was not the Helena agent from the ranch. He was older, better dressed, with the particular bearing of someone accustomed to being the most significant person in any room he entered. He looked at Alderton with the flat, cold recognition of professional enemies. And then he looked at Nathan, and then he looked at Clara, and something happened in his face that was very brief and very controlled, but she saw it. He recognized her. She had never seen him before in her life, which meant he had a description of her. Which meant Greer had a description of her that was accurate enough to identify her on site in a room in Helena. "Alderton," the man said, "I wasn't aware you had an appointment this morning." "I have several," Alderton said without inflection. "This is a private legal consultation. You've entered without invitation." "I was in the building on other business." "Then I'd suggest you return to it." Alderton's voice was pleasant and had iron all the way through it. The man looked at Clara one more time. She held the look without moving. "Miss," he said. She said nothing. He left. The door closed. Nathan was on his feet. "Who was that?" "His name is Foster," Alderton said. He was already at his filing cabinet removing a folder, moving with a speed that had not been present 10 seconds earlier. "He is Greer's primary legal representative in Helena, and his being in this building this morning on the day of our meeting is not a coincidence." "He saw her," Nathan said. "Yes." "He'll tell Greer she's in Helena." "He will have told Greer before he reached the bottom of the stairs," Alderton said. He put the folder on the desk and looked at them both. "I'm going to file the federal initiation today, this afternoon. I was planning to wait until I had the survey copies, but Foster being here changes the timeline." "If you file today, what does that do?" Clara said. "It puts the case into federal record," Alderton said. "It doesn't protect you from private action. I cannot guarantee that, but it means anything that happens to you or to this ranch from this point forward happens in the context of an active federal proceeding. It raises the cost of interference considerably." "Considerably," Nathan said. "Not absolutely." "Not absolutely," Alderton said, and he said it without apology, because he was a man who did not offer comfort he could not deliver. "Which is why I'm also going to contact a federal marshal today. His name is Calloway. He works this district. He is not connected to any territorial office that Meridian has influence over. I have verified this personally." "You've been building this for 18 months, Clara said. "You had the marshal already identified." "I had several pieces already in position," Alderton said. "I was waiting for the centerpiece." He looked at the journal on his desk. "Now I have it." She looked at the journal. She had carried it for 4 years. She had kept it under her bed in 7 different rooms, and in the bottom of her suitcase, and against her body, on the long coach rides, and she had never not once let it out of her control. "Is it going to be safe here?" she asked. "I'm going to put it in the federal evidence vault this afternoon," Alderton said. "Once it's there, it requires a federal court order to remove. Greer cannot touch it through private means." She looked at it one more moment. She reached out and she pushed it across the desk to Alderton, and she took her hand away. It was the strangest feeling she had had in 4 years. Lighter than she had expected. Not empty lighter. The difference between setting something down and losing it. Nathan was watching her. She did not look at him. Not yet. She was not ready for whatever she would see in his face. "We should get back to the hotel," she said. "If Foster saw us here, the hotel is already compromised." "I have a house," Alderton said. "On the eastern side. My sister's family there's room. It's not connected to my professional address." "We'll take it," Nathan said before Clara could respond. She did not argue. They left Alderton's office, and they walked out onto the Federal District Street in the full afternoon light. And Clara walked between Nathan and the street side with her coat closed and her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and she did not run. She had not run in, she counted 31 days. It occurred to her walking the streets of Helena with a federal case in motion and a man at her side who had put his ranch and his name and his standing into this without being asked, that 31 days was both a very short time and longer than any continuous period of stillness she had managed in 4 years. Elliot met them at the hotel with the expression of a boy who had been waiting a specific amount of time and had opinions about it. "That was 4 hours," he said. "Yes," Nathan said. "You said 3. "I was wrong," Nathan said. "It happens occasionally." Elliot looked at Clara. Did it work? She looked at this boy, this careful, precise, clear-eyed boy, who had told her his father said serious problems were the only ones worth having, and she said, "Yes, it's working." He nodded, satisfied in the way of someone whose fundamental expectation has been confirmed. They went in. That evening in the sitting room of James Alderton's sister's house on the eastern side of Helena, with Elliot asleep in the next room, and the sound of a city going about its ordinary business outside. Nathan sat across from Clara at a small table and said, "I want to ask you something." "All right," she said. "When this is finished," he said, "when the case is filed and the marshal is in motion and Greer's name is in the federal record, what do you want?" She looked at him. She had not. She realized been asked this question. Not once in 4 years. What she had been offered was shelter temporary conditional. What she had been asked was whether she had what she needed, whether she was working hard enough, whether her references checked out. Nobody had asked what she wanted. "I want my name clean," she said. "I want to stop looking at ridgelines." "That's what you need," he said. "I asked what you want." She was quiet for a moment. "I want a kitchen that's mine," she said finally. "I want a garden that I get to see through a whole season. I want—" She stopped. He waited. "I want to stop leaving before I find out what something becomes," she said. Nathan looked at her across the small table in the borrowed sitting room of a house in Helena, Montana, and he said, "Then stop." 2 words, no conditions attached. "Oh." She looked at him, and she thought about everything she had been afraid of, and everything that had already happened, and everything that was still uncertain. And she thought about the kitchen garden at Raven Ridge, with the first green rows that were unmistakably something. And she thought about the supply list with the notation more than last time because of the bread. "All right," she said. Outside the city moved through its evening. Inside the lamp held steady. And across the table, Nathan Cole looked at Clara Whitmore with the specific directness of a man who means what he says and does not say what he doesn't mean, and the distance between them felt for the first time like something that had been crossed rather than something that remained. They rode back to Willow Creek on a Tuesday, and the Montana sky was the kind of wide and clear that feels almost aggressive after 3 days in a city like the land itself, asserting that it is larger than whatever happened to you while you were gone. Elliot slept for the first hour and was awake and asking questions for the remaining 2 days, which Clara found to her mild surprise not exhausting but grounding. His questions were specific and practical in the way his questions always were not. What does this mean for us? But how does a federal filing work? And what happens to the survey markers now? And if Greer's attorneys try to challenge the jurisdiction, what does Alderton do then? Nathan answered each one with the same patient precision he had used for the geography questions on the way out, and Clara listened to them talk and felt something she did not immediately have a name for. It felt like the future being discussed, as though it were a real place they were all going to. She had not felt that in 4 years. Holt met them at the gate when they arrived, which was not something Holt typically did. Holt managed the ranch with the self-directed efficiency of a man who did not need to be supervised or to supervise others unnecessarily. His being at the gate meant something had happened. Nathan saw it too. He leaned out of the coach before it had fully stopped. "What?" "Fire," Holt said. "Night before last, the Eastern feed barn." The coach stopped. Nathan was out before the door had swung fully open. "How much total?" Holt said. "Nothing salvageable. No animals, we got them clear. No men hurt." Nathan stood very still. Clara watched his jaw set in the way she had learned meant he was absorbing something large and refusing to let it take him sideways. "Anyone see who said it?" he said. "No one admitted to seeing it start," Holt said carefully. "But Denny was on the east fence at midnight, and he said there was a rider moving away from the property at speed about 20 minutes before he smelled the smoke." Nathan looked at Clara. She looked back. They did not need to say it. Foster had seen them in Alderton's office on Friday afternoon. By Friday evening, Greer had known. The fire was Saturday night. The mathematics of it were simple and brutal. This was a message delivered in the 12-hour window between Greer learning the federal case had been filed and whatever Greer's attorneys were planning as a legal response. This was the part of the pattern she had read in the journal. The escalation that came when the target did not yield. "How long to rebuild?" Nathan said to Holt. 6 weeks minimum, Holt said. 8 if the lumber supply is slow. "Start the order tomorrow," Nathan said. "Full replacement." He turned and looked at the property, not at the damaged barn. She understood, but at all of it, at the whole shape of Raven Ridge Ranch, in the afternoon light, and something in his posture made the decision visible before he said a word. He was not afraid. He was not wavering. He was doing the thing he had probably done 100 times in the years of building this property, absorbing the damage and moving through it. "They're trying to frighten you," Clara said from beside him. "I know," he said. "It's going to get worse before the federal case creates enough consequence to stop them." "I know that too," he said. He looked at her. "You're not going anywhere." It was not a question. "No," she said. "I'm not." Holt looked between them with the expression of a man who is professionally committed to minding his own business and is finding it a considerable effort. "I'll start the lumber order," he said and went. The next 3 weeks were the hardest ones, not because of the fire. The fire was damage, significant damage, expensive damage, but damage that had a concrete response, a rebuilding timeline, a set of practical steps that occupied Nathan and Holt and the hands from first light to last. Damage with a solution was manageable. Clara had learned to respect Nathan's particular relationship with solvable problems. He was never more focused, never more himself, than when there was a concrete thing to be done and a set of resources to do it with. The hard part was the waiting. Alderton filed the federal initiation. The afternoon they had left his office, and the federal marshal Calloway made contact with Nathan by telegraph 4 days after they returned, and then the machinery of federal process moved at the speed that federal process moves, which is not the speed of a fire in a barn, or men on horseback, or any of the other immediate threats. It was the speed of documents, and court calendars, and jurisdiction arguments, and the particular grinding patience of law. Greer's attorneys filed a counter-challenge within the week as expected. They argued private property dispute, argued the journal had been obtained illegally, argued that Miss Clara Whitmore, her name, her real name in the filing for anyone to read, was a disgruntled former employee with a personal grievance against a respectable Denver businessman. When Nathan showed her the counter-filing, she sat with it for a long time. "They used my name," she said. "Yes, that means anyone who's been looking for me." Clara. He said it quietly, the way he said things when he needed her to stay with him rather than ahead of him. Your name is also in the federal filing, on the right side of it. Both names are in the record now. The difference is which document they appear in. She looked at him. You're not the woman in hiding anymore, he said. You're the federal witness. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. She pressed her palm flat on the counter, filing the way she used to press her palm against the suitcase lid, breathing. All right, she said. He put his hand over hers on the paper, brief and certain, and then he moved away to deal with the next thing on the ranch, because that was Nathan Cole present for exactly the moment that mattered, and then moving forward, never lingering in the sentiment of it, but never absent from it either. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hand where his had been. Then she went back to work. It was Dorothea who broke the case open. Clara had given Alderton the name and the neighborhood, and not thought further about it, because Dorothea was a thread she had offered without confidence, a maybe rather than a certainty. She had not known where the woman was, had not contacted her in 4 years, and had assumed she was either unreachable or unwilling. Alderton found her in Kansas City, Missouri, living with her daughter's family. He sent a junior associate rather than going himself, which was the correct instinct. Dorothea was a private woman who would have been frightened by a senior attorney on her doorstep, but a younger man who asked careful questions and listened more than he talked was something she could work with. She had kept her own record. This was what Nathan read to Clara from Alderton's telegraph on a Wednesday afternoon in the kitchen, and this was the moment that cracked the waiting open. Dorothea had kept a record, not a journal in the way of Greer's journal, not legal documentation, but a domestic account, the kind that housekeepers sometimes keep of household events and visitors and incidents that struck her as irregular. She had kept it because she was a woman who had learned over a long life of domestic work in wealthy households that records were protection, and she had kept it in the same quiet, unremarked way that Clara had kept cooking well in every kitchen, regardless of what else was happening. The record documented 14 visits by men connected to the Meridian Land Associates network across a period of 3 years. It documented specific dates. It documented the names she had overheard, which were not the names of ranch owners and survey clerks, but the names of the men behind them. It corroborated the journal on 11 of the 14 families. Alderton's telegraph ended with 4 words. We have enough now. Clara read it twice. Nathan watched her. Enough for what? She said, though she knew. To move from initiation to full proceeding, he said. Alderton files the expanded case within the week. That triggers the federal marshal's active jurisdiction. He paused. And it means Greer's attorneys can no longer argue. Your journal was a personal grievance. 2 independent witnesses, 2 independent records corroborating across 11 instances. She put the telegraph on the table. She sat down. She had been standing for so much of the last 31 days, standing in the kitchen, standing in Alderton's office, standing in the corridor of a Helena hotel, holding a suitcase she had carried for 4 years, that sitting down felt like something she had to remember how to do. It's going to be all right, Elliot said from the stool. She looked at him. He was eating an apple, the unself-conscious eating of a boy who has spent enough time in a kitchen that he has stopped asking if he can take things from the bowl on the work table. You were listening, Nathan said. The whole time, Elliot said without apology. Nathan looked at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of a man selecting patience. Clara almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her enough that it actually became a laugh short reel, the first one in a while, and Nathan looked at her with an expression that was so close to warmth it had become the thing itself. It's going to be all right, she said to Elliot. Yes. The federal expanded case was filed 9 days later. Warren Greer was served with the federal papers in Denver on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, his primary attorney had contacted Alderton requesting a conference. By Friday evening, Greer's legal team had filed a motion for jurisdictional review that Alderton described in his telegraph to Nathan as desperate and unlikely to succeed. The survey markers on the eastern boundary of Raven Ridge Ranch were officially frozen pending the outcome of the federal proceeding, which meant Pearson could not move them, could not contest them, could not use them as the foundation for any further acquisition claim until the court was satisfied. The pressure that had been building against the ranch for 2 years went not immediately, but substantially still. Holt came to the kitchen on the Saturday after the filing to tell Clara that the fence line crew had finished the eastern boundary resetting and that the lumber for the rebuilt feed barn had arrived from Billings. "We'll have the barn up in 3 weeks," he said. "Good," she said. He stood for a moment. "Miss Whitmore." She looked up. "Mend the hands," he said, and stopped in the way. Holt stopped when he was saying something personal and was not entirely certain of the wording. "They wanted me to say something." "All right," she said. "They know what you did," he said. "What you brought here. What you—" He stopped again. "We know it wasn't easy, and we know things might have gone different, and we know the ranch is still standing because of what you put on the line." He looked at a point near her left shoulder. "That's all." She looked at this man who had done her supply list before she could ask, and noted more than last time because of the bread, and had watched her without comment through 3 weeks of federal proceedings and a barn fire and all of it. "Holt," she said. "Miss Whitmore." "Tell them thank you," she said. "And tell Denny if he wants a second helping at supper, he doesn't have to apologize for it anymore." Holt's mouth did the thing it did when he was preventing a smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He left. She stood in the kitchen, and she breathed, and it did not shake. The morning that changed everything. The one she would return to, later in her memory, as the hinge on which the rest of her life turned, was an ordinary Tuesday in October. The kitchen garden had come to full harvest. She had been bringing in the last of it over the past 2 weeks, the root vegetables that had outlasted the first frost, the dried herbs she had hung from the kitchen ceiling on Holt's suggested nail hooks, the small and improbable crop of things she had grown from seeds that had sat in the pantry for years before she arrived. Elliot had helped. He had discovered approximately 6 weeks ago that growing things was interesting in a way he had not expected, and he had taken on the harvest with the systematic intensity he brought to everything. Howe was at the work table when she came in from the garden that Tuesday, doing something careful with a ball of dough that she recognized as an attempt at biscuits from memory, without asking which was either impressive initiative or a moderate kitchen disaster in formation. She set down her basket. She watched him for a moment. "You're overworking it," she said. "I know," he said. "I've been overworking it for 5 minutes. I was waiting for you to tell me." "Why didn't you just stop?" "Because I wanted to know how long it would take you to notice." She looked at him. He looked at her. He was not, she realized, entirely joking. He had been running a small experiment in her attentiveness and had concluded it took approximately 5 minutes, which he would now know forever. "Throw it out and start again," she said. "Less mixing once the liquid's in." He threw it out and started again without complaint, which was something she had noted about Elliot over the course of 2 months. He did not have the resistance to correction that some children had the defensive attachment to the first attempt. He simply incorporated the correction and moved forward, which was either a result of good upbringing or the particular character of a boy who had lost enough to understand that holding on to the wrong things was not the same as holding on. Nathan came through the kitchen door at 8:30. This was not unusual. He had been coming through the kitchen at 8:30 for weeks, since a conversation between them about the ranch's morning schedule had revealed that 8:30 was the gap between the hands going to their work and Elliot going to his reading hour, and it was the 15 minutes in the day when the kitchen was quiet and the coffee was fresh, and Nathan had a habit, which he had apparently had for a long time, of needing 15 minutes of quiet in the morning before the rest of the day began. She had started having his coffee ready at 8:30. He had not commented on this. He simply came in, poured the coffee, sat at the kitchen table for 15 minutes, and left. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. She had stopped reading it as a sign of anything except what it was. A man who had been alone in his own house for years and had discovered that being in the same room as a specific other person was something different from being alone. That morning he came in and poured his coffee and looked at Elliot at the work table and said, "What's he doing?" "Biscuits," Clara said. "Can he?" "Probably not yet," she said. "But he's learning the right way." Nathan sat down. He drank his coffee. Elliot worked the dough with focused concentration. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the dried herbs on the ceiling and the particular warm quality of a working stove. Nathan said, "Alderton sent a letter." She looked at him. "When?" "Yesterday. I didn't want to open it until this morning." He put the letter on the table. "I wanted to open it here." She crossed to the table. She sat down across from him. She looked at the envelope, which was Alderton's firm stationery, formal and heavy. "Open it," she said. He opened it. He read it. She watched his face. His face did not do much, while he read Nathan's face never did much, but she had become fluent in the specific language of it over 2 months, the minor adjustments that most people would miss, and that she had learned to read the way she read the kitchen by smell. She saw his jaw release. She saw something around his eyes go from held to not held. She saw the particular quality of a man receiving information that he has been bracing against for long enough that the bracing has become structural. And now, the thing he was bracing against is not there, and the structure has to recalibrate. He set the letter on the table, and he turned it toward her without a word. She read, Warren Greer had accepted a negotiated federal settlement. The details were still being finalized, but the substance was this full acknowledgement of the Meridian Land Associates fraud operation, documented across 14 properties in 3 territories. Full federal record of the scheme. Financial restitution to the affected families to be determined by the court. Greer's land acquisition operations to be dissolved. His attorneys had negotiated the settlement in exchange for avoiding criminal trial, which Alderton had accepted because the settlement achieved everything the case needed to achieve, and achieved it faster than a trial would have. Clara Whitmore's name, the letter said, would appear in the final federal record as the originating witness, whose evidence had initiated the proceeding. The survey dispute on the eastern boundary of Raven Ridge Ranch would be resolved in Nathan Cole's favor within 30 days. She put the letter down. She sat very still for a moment. "It's done," Elliot said from the work table. He had been reading over her shoulder, which she had not noticed until this moment. "Yes," she said. "Is that what done feels like?" he said. She looked at him. This boy who had lost his parents and come to live with an uncle who didn't laugh anymore, who had sat on a stool in a broken kitchen and talked about his father in a flat factual voice, and eaten apple cake with his eyes going briefly soft, who had walked a telegraph to a Helena office so no one would watch, who had sat in Alderton's office for 4 hours and said, "That's 4 hours, you said 3. "Yes," she said. "That's what done feels like." He thought about this. Then he went back to his biscuits. Nathan was looking at her. She met the look. There was a long moment that was not uncomfortable and not full of anything that required words, and that was itself something she had not expected to find. A silence with a person in it that did not require management, that did not need to be navigated or survived. A silence that was simply 2 people who had come through something together, sitting in the same room, present in the same moment. "I want to show you something," Nathan said. He stood. She followed him out of the kitchen and down the hall and through the front of the house and out onto the front porch, and she stepped out and looked at what he was pointing at. The kitchen garden, full and finished and real, the last of the autumn harvest, visible in the rows she had cleared from overgrowth in her 2nd week on the ranch. The rows that had been overgrown but not dead. She would have loved this, Nathan said. He was not looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the garden, and his voice had the quality of something said honestly, rather than carefully, without the armor he usually wore when he spoke of his wife. "She tried to grow things every season we were here. The first 2 years it didn't take. She said it was her that she hadn't figured the soil out yet. She kept trying." Clara looked at the garden. "She figured it out," Clara said. "The soil's good. Whatever she did the last season she was here, she did it right. It was waiting." Nathan was quiet. "Things wait," she said. "Sometimes longer than you'd expect." He looked at her then. And the thing she saw in his face in that moment was not the reading look, and not the closed-door quality, and not the careful assessment she had learned to translate over 2 months. It was something prior to all of those, something that had been there longer than the grief and the responsibility and the years of managing alone. Something that was simply a man looking at a woman he has come to trust in the way you trust very few things in a life, not because they're perfect, but because they've been tested and held. "I know you said you wanted a kitchen that was yours," he said. "I did say that," she said. "This kitchen," he said. "This one specifically, not a kitchen somewhere else." "Nathan, I'm not asking you to decide anything," he said. "I'm asking you to know something. There's a difference." He looked at her steadily. "You can stay as long as you want. You can go whenever you need. I will not—" He stopped. "I will not be the thing that keeps you somewhere you don't want to be. But I need you to know that this ranch, this kitchen, this—" He stopped again, and she understood that Nathan Cole, who was precise and methodical, and did not say things he hadn't considered, was struggling with the wording because the thing he was trying to say did not have a tidy legal structure. "This place has become yours," he said finally. "As far as I'm concerned, it was yours from the moment you decided not to go out the back." She stood on the porch of Raven Ridge Ranch in the October morning and looked at the kitchen garden and felt the cold air on her face, and felt underneath that the particular warmth of a place that knows you are in it. She thought about Denver and the stagecoach and Willow Creek and Harriet on the boardwalk, and Ruth saying it's 3 miles north, and the broken kitchen, and the unlabeled spice jars, and the damper on the stove, and the boy on the stool, and the supply list with the notation in Holt's handwriting, and the journal under the bed, and the Ridgeline, and the Helena Hotel, and Alderton's office, and the letter on the table this morning. And she thought about what it had taken to get from one end of that to the other. It had taken 4 years. It had taken 31 days. It had taken most specifically one Tuesday morning in June when she had picked up her suitcase and not gone out the back. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Nathan looked at her. "I know I've said that before," she said, "but I want to say it differently this time. I'm not staying because I have nowhere to go. I'm not staying because the case is settled and it's safe, and I don't have a reason to run anymore." She held his gaze. "I'm staying because this is where I want to be. That's a different thing." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, it is." From inside the house, they heard Elliot's voice raised in a brief contained expletive, the specific sound of a 12-year-old who has dropped something, followed by a pause, followed by the resumption of kitchen sounds that indicated the situation was recoverable. Nathan looked at the kitchen window. Clara looked at it too. They went back inside. Elliot had dropped the biscuit pan, but saved the biscuits, which he was rearranging with a focused dignity that did not invite comment. Nathan poured more coffee. Clara went to the stove and checked the heat. The kitchen moved back into the particular specific earned rhythm of a place that has found what it is supposed to be and does not need to announce it. 3 months later, when the federal record was finalized and the restitution process for the 14 families had begun, a letter arrived at Raven Ridge Ranch addressed to Clara Whitmore. It was from one of the families named in the journal, a family who had lost their property in Colorado 4 years earlier and had spent those 4 years believing the loss was permanent and the people who had caused it were untouchable. She read the letter at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her coat near her heart. She did not tell Nathan what was in it. Not because it was private, but because some things are complete in themselves and do not require translation. A family that had lost everything and had it returned. A woman who had carried a journal for 4 years in the belief that it mattered that the 14 names deserved more than silence, that standing still in the right place was its own kind of courage. It was enough to know it. It was more than enough. Elliot came to the kitchen that evening and sat on his stool and looked at her with his careful, clear eyes and said, "Are you happy?" She looked at this boy who had once told her about his father in a flat, factual voice, and had eaten apple cake with his uncle's eyes going briefly soft, and had run a telegraph message so no one would watch, and had asked, "Are we in trouble with the directness of someone who needed honest answers?" "Yes," she said. He nodded, satisfied in the way of someone whose fundamental expectation has once again been confirmed. Outside, the Montana wind moved across the open land of Raven Ridge Ranch. The kitchen garden was resting for the winter, waiting for spring, the way good soil always waits, not emptied, not defeated, but patient and ready, and certain of what it was made to grow. Inside the kitchen, the stove ran true, and the spice jars were labeled, and the damper had been fixed, and the apple cake was the right kind, and the supply list on the work table had a new notation in Holt's handwriting, same as last time. She finally got it right. Clara Whitmore had arrived at Raven Ridge Ranch with one old suitcase, a 4-year secret, and the careful, practiced posture of a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. She had found in a broken kitchen in Montana something that no amount of running had managed to give her, and no amount of hiding had managed to replace. She had found the place where her life was waiting for her, and she did not leave.